Speaking of men and women, that is a big discussion within the way everything is happening with collegiate athletics going forward. July 1, revenue sharing comes to the NCAA and college athletics. $20.5 million is what schools will be allowed to share with their student athletes. How they do that is up to them. Now, in the waning hours of the Biden administration, I'm going to mention politics because this is how everything is being governed from the top. In the waning hours of the Biden administration, Title IX guidance said that your revenue sharing had to be equivalent between men and women. So out of that 20.5, 11 or 10.25 had to go to men, 10.25 had to go to women. Most universities had not been planning on that. I can tell you that. Because we have a graphic that we'll get to here in a minute. Trump administration has come in, and on top of potential other sweeping changes that are so difficult to get into that we can't until anything actually happens with the Department of Education, but they have rescinded that guidance, which means, one, there's going to be court cases. With the NCAA, there's always court cases, but it says that you do not have to revenue share based on Title IX. There's a lot there, Nick, on the way all of this is going and what this means for Nebraska athletics. You, as somebody who is, one, covered collegiate athletics for quite a while and also been in the game calling it, which you will do with the Husker Radio Network, how difficult is all of this to follow for not just the everyday person, but for us as we're in it and it's already difficult to follow?
Absolutely, because the goalposts keep getting moved on this thing too, where I know the one question we all had when we knew about this settlement that will finalize on April 7th is when we'll have the actual final ruling on this thing, but it's coming and everybody's prepared for it to be coming. Is our initial question was, well, how does this impact Title IX? What is this going to look like? And nobody ever really had a clear answer. You mentioned the 10.5, and that's what it sounded like. Okay, I guess that would be how you would go about it, but you're right. Nobody was planning on doing that. 75% of that revenue share, by all accounts, was going to go to football. And then you were going to probably look at men's basketball to prioritize as well because of the revenue that it brings in with the NCAA tournament. Now, what we are all of a sudden seeing when it comes to, okay, wait, let's back it up just a little bit here, is look at what the women's basketball tournament did last year. When they started promoting it, and yes, it helped that you had players like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, and you have superstars, but hey, you still have Juju Watkins. You still have some very exciting players.
Paige Beckers.
Absolutely. And you've got coaching personalities as well that are being that those personalities and these teams are being promoted a lot more. You're seeing a lot more endorsements with them. You're seeing them a lot more mainstream when it comes to the women's college basketball side of it. We know here locally, the Nebraska volleyball is on a Candace Parker, Patrick Mahomes, Dick's Sporting Goods commercial too. So we know that there has been a much better effort here recently than there has been ever when it comes to promoting women's sports and being able to showcase that, the TV deals that can help that. But it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not like all of a sudden tomorrow we can say, hey, women's basketball deserves to get the same as college football. Okay, there is still a lot of ground to cover. So then you start thinking, okay, now look at the individual markets, look at the individual schools. And this is where I say Nebraska itself, I think, is in a pretty good spot compared to other schools when it comes to women's athletics. Mention volleyball, and that goes without saying. That is the biggest thing going next to football. And the success, as we know, has been better than Nebraska football. But also women's basketball, I think you see those games in Lincoln too. They get good attendance. When there is a call to action of, hey, fans, we need you to come out and pack Pinnacle Bank Arena, they pretty much do it. And, the NIL packages between 1890 and local businesses that want to get involved, not just with student athletes, but also, more importantly, women's student athletes. We saw what Ron Yates and Nebraska Crossing did for women's volleyball too. There is, I think, a very unique offering that is coming throughout the surrounding businesses and the state of Nebraska when it comes to supporting female athletics. So I think Nebraska, and there's probably other programs, other schools out there that have something similar that I think are going to continue to drive this. But you brought up something that I think is going to be also very interesting. All these things are seen court cases. And
yeah,
we know that a lot of the courts are favoring the student athletes. When it comes to Title IX, will that continue? Will they continue to favor the student athletes? And in this case, being the female student athletes, because you know it and I know it. These things are going to be contested. If the revenue share is 80% of it going to male athletes, this will be contested. How will the courts rule? Because they'll always rule in favor of the student athletes. That's what I've learned from this. The NCAA, sorry, your days when it comes to that are done. But if it comes down to, are we ruling in favor of the male student athlete or the female student athlete? That to me, Kaleb, is going to be very, very interesting and very uncomfortable to watch.
Well, yeah, because one of the ways schools showed that they were within compliance when it comes to Title IX was the way that they gave out athletic scholarships. That's the reason that you go to an athletic website, Nebraska's included, and you see, well, why are there more women's sports than there are men? Because the men have football. Because there's a football program.
A lot of scholarships there.
85 scholarships.
Yep.
And now that's going to go up to, if you fully fund it, 105. So there's already going to be differences in the way you lay out an athletic department because of the roster sizes and the unlimited scholarships up to that roster size now. Volleyball going up to, 18?
Yep.
Like in baseball, baseball with what was it, like 11.7 or 12.1 scholarships, whatever it was, for a team where if you were to fully fund 11 guys, you can't play a baseball season with that.
No, you had a 35-man roster. So what do you do with the other half of the team?
Same thing goes to softball. Same thing goes to track and field, soccer. The only ones that were fully funded if you were on scholarship, football, women's basketball, men's basketball, right? I think that was it. Maybe volleyball, but yeah, it was, you have not been fully on scholarship just because you were on scholarship. You didn't have everything paid for. Right. That part is going to be up to the schools. How much of that scholarship do they change? There are some Southern schools saying they are going to fully fund their baseball programs. I'm going to be interested to see how much that changes the lay of the land. I know the Southern schools have tended to dominate what is college baseball. But Nick, when we look at what does that percentage look like? And before the Biden Department of Education guidance had come out, Texas Tech, this is what Texas Tech's looked like, is what they were going to do. And 74% of that, or about $15.2 million, was going to go to football. And then you start to look at the mouths to feed.
Yep.
Men's basketball next, then volleyball. That was a surprise for me looking at Texas Tech, to then go about between 4 and 5% going to volleyball, and then splitting it up between women's basketball and baseball. For Nebraska, you have to imagine volleyball is going to be at least the 1.5 to 2 million, and that starts to cut into your overall percentage. And there are going to be some people that say, give it all to football and get the football program back on track. But like you mentioned, and like we have seen here, you had the women's basketball tournament last year. Go off in the ratings, go off in the revenue generated.
Higher viewership in the national championship than the men's national championship. That to me is that's not nothing right there.
You've seen what it looks like for Nebraska volleyball here to 92,003 at Memorial Stadium. It wasn't just an event. It was a celebration because those people keep showing up. You're going to be in Pinnacle Bank Arena for the first couple matches this fall. If you fund it, if you support it, these things have a chance to grow. So I think you're going to have schools come up to that decision of, where is that line for still funding something that is really blossoming, is really sitting there with the potential to grow. And we are really fortunate where we live, Nick, because we get to see what it looks like for for Husker volleyball. We get to see just across state lines what it has looked like for Hawkeye women's basketball and all of the growth that they've helped do for the women's game there. We are very fortunate where we are. Not every part of the country does this. So when you look at like Texas Tech and you look at, okay, where do you move some of those numbers?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're probably going to have to drop, like if we were just working off these numbers, you got to increase women's volleyball for sure.
Yep.
You might have to decrease football and men's basketball to increase what you get to women's basketball, baseball, and probably have to send something over to softball because Rhonda Rebels had a hell of a program.
Yep.
And they've look like they have a big year coming up. But then you start to really think about it, and the bowling program at Nebraska, I know it's not a lot of money, but they've had as much success as anyone.
Sure.
Men's gymnastics has had as much success as anyone historically with national championships, getting to the Final Four or whatever it's called now, getting to the finals at nationals. Men's track and field has more Big Ten championships than anyone else on campus.
Yeah.
There's a lot of mouths to feed if you start looking at where do you throw a little bit of money, and then at that point, is it even worth it if it's, okay, here's $200,000 to a track program with 80 guys.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's the other thing that's interesting, just looking at those numbers. The first thing that stands out, we're talking about Texas Tech. It continues to show you, if you're looking at 4.1 to 5.1% of the piece of that pie going to volleyball, how rapidly that sport is growing. We spent a lot of time just talking about women's basketball in that game and how it has really grown, and they've done a good job of promoting the product. But volleyball is, I think, maybe the quickest riser out of all of women's sports right now. And Nebraska is in the center of that, which is a great place to be. You're right about softball too, because women's College World Series numbers have been very, very good. And we've seen once you get into regionals and super regionals, there's a lot of eyeballs on that product as well. So I think softball is on the come. I don't think as fast as volleyball and women's basketball, but it's definitely there on the come, especially when you get there at the end of the year out there in Oklahoma City. It's just how much are these conferences and their networks, their television networks, putting into the television product of promoting those sports from a conference standpoint, I think is also a big part of this. But here's the other thing, and I want to go back to the courts for a second, Kaleb. At what point will the Department of Justice, I never thought we would be talking about the Department of Justice, the old presidential administration, the new presidential administration.
They're going to play a big part in all of this.
Yes,
it's not necessarily who is sitting in the White House, and that will play a part, because then that moves the train down the track. But all of the different parts of government, you're seeing it at state legislatures on deciding on what they're doing with name, image, likeness, on whether or not that money is exempt from income tax. You're going to see what happens out of Congress. And of course, like you're talking about, what comes up in the courts. And a lot of this is going to get to the Supreme Court.
It is. And here's the one area that I don't know if it's getting as much conversation as I think eventually it will, as we're trying to do this exercise, Kaleb. And that is, at what point will the Department of Justice say capping the revenue share is going to be not in line with antitrust, is going to all of a sudden go back to the courts and saying, why do we need to put a cap on this? If you have enough support locally in your respective universities and people are still donating, and you can afford, between the TV revenue that you are getting and all of the donations that are coming in, and your collective now in-house and working together, and you can afford more than that, and so you can give either football more, or you can divvy it up to some of the other sports that maybe aren't getting as high of a percentage. Now you can give them a little bit more because you have willing donors. At what point will we say, you know what, you can't put a cap on this because that's not within the antitrust? That's a violation. NCAA has had to battle this. This is why we are where we are right now, because the NCAA kept a blind eye. They were so archaic when it came to this. Now, did I ever think we would be in this position? No, but I think we've gotten to this position because they turned their back on this growing problem that is now just erupted into essentially free agency, and essentially is turned into pro sports. That's why we are here. So I would keep my eye on this cap. at 20.5 or $21 million per university, where all of a sudden that cap might be blown up.
And I'm curious if that cap will, simply because you can still do those third-party deals. You can still go to 1890. So you'll have your 20.5, and Nebraska can decide however they distribute that. But on top of that, you can still do your third-party deals where your donors can send stuff to 1890, and 1890 can help them with name, image, likeness stuff. You can still have people do stuff with the heating and air conditioning if they are Dakota's Crawford, if they are the polar bear, like they can still do these things. You can still have Bergen Riley do stuff with Red Bull. Like those types of things will still exist. I'm curious where those arguments would come in court. And we are a long way. The only reason we bring this up is because there was the new guidance. And they're also looking at instituting someone to be in charge of the way NIL operates from the NCAA.
They need that badly.
And also a reporting system, a clearinghouse, essentially. If you have any NIL deal over $600, that you have to report that, and to make sure that it's on the up and up. It's not pay for play. You're actually doing something that the way name, image, likeness was intended, the way I would have liked it to be at least utilized when I was a collegiate athlete, because no one was going to pay me just to throw far. I wasn't throwing that far. All right. But yeah, Nate, this will be something a lot will change between now and April. We'll get to that court date in April, and a lot will change between then and July 1. And I'm sure at some point in there, Nebraska will release the way they are intending to divvy up this money, but a lot to change between now and then.